Okay, guys, so I want to take a little bit of time to just talk about the structure of a tragedy and a comedy, a classical tragedy and a comedy, which is like if we think back to Shakespeare and the way that he wrote plays. And the reason why we want to look at the way Shakespeare wrote plays is because um, Tennessee Williams is really playing off of that. Tennessee Williams is using that structure. He plays with it, he changes it, but he definitely uses it. And if you watch a lot of movies that you watch very closely today, modern movies, they use these structures too. These are not things that are past and gone. They're very common, and you'll recognize them as we go through this a little bit. Okay, so I want to start. Let's look at the tragic structure. So we have kind of the form of a triangle or a peak, right? We start with Act 1, go to Act 2. Act 3 is the peak of our triangle. Act 4 and Act 5. Shakespeare's plays were written in 5 acts. So if you look at Shakespeare's plays, you're going to find that they all kind of formulate themselves in this sort of order. So in Act 1 of a tragedy, we meet the hero, right? So the hero is introduced to us. They're somebody who's usually on the rise or respected. Um, they're introduced as a person that we should admire. And there's a change in their life. So we get this change in their life that is introduced. A lot of times it's just something that is not settled. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just a change. And then in Act 2, the hero starts taking advantage of that change, and they start to take control, and they're on the rise. We see this potential for them in the first act, and in Act 2, we see that potential start to be fulfilled, and they start to take control, and they rise. And when we get to Act 3, we get to the middle of the play, and the hero really successfully reaches the peak of their success. They are now at the height of their power. Now, if we think of, say, a play like Macbeth, which some of you may have read and some of you may not, um, the hero starts taking control. To take control, he actually murders the king. And in Act 3, he is crowned king, right? That's the height of that tragic hero's power. But then things start to go out of control. He tries to hold on to that crown. There have been people who suspect him, and he kind of goes on a murdering rampage to keep himself the king. And his life starts to spiral out of control. So in Act 4, that's what we see. We see the hero's life spiraling out of control. And that continues right into Act 5. And in Act 5, the hero dies. And when the hero dies, order is restored, things are good, because by that time the hero has messed things up, and things have been messed up by life just spiraling out of control. So that's what a tragedy does. A tragedy starts with the hero rises to the middle of the play, and then everything after the play spirals out of control and ends in their death. A comedy actually does the opposite. You guys probably recognize the tragic structure a little bit from kind of dramatic movies that you see. They kind of use that form sometimes, right? Cop movies or even gangster movies where you see these people kind of take over and establish really kind of large power structures around them. So if anyone's ever watched Breaking Bad, classic tragedy, right? Heisenberg on the rise, but we know how it's going to end. Things are going to get ugly, things are going to spiral out of control, and he's going to end up dead. Okay, comedy, you guys probably recognize even more because this is still the very standard romantic comedy that we see, right? The hero's introduced, there's a change introduced as well. So we have something that's very similar. And then in Act 2, that's when the hero's life spirals out of control. So where in a tragedy the hero's taking control in Act 2, in Act 2 of a comedy, the hero's life is spiraling out of control. Things are getting worse. and they can't seem to control their fate. And then when they hit Act 3, it's rock bottom. It's like there is no way this will ever work out when we get to the middle of a comic play or a romantic comedy. Like, this is done. So the hero hits rock bottom. And then something happens and the hero starts taking control and they're on the rise. Things start coming together in Act 4, right? They start getting respected for things that were unknown, or miscommunications start to get cleared up, and they're on the rise. And then when we get to the final act, the hero gets married, order's restored. Often what happens in a comedy as well. Now, it doesn't have to be an actual conventional marriage, but girl gets boy or boy gets girl, or or girl gets girl, boy gets boy. Like we have them accomplish what they're out to accomplish. Maybe the marriage that they already have is restored. That's the structure of a comedy. It switches things. It's just the mirror of the tragedy. So what happens is sometimes in a play you're wondering, well, where am I? Like, am I in a tragedy or am I in a comedy? And the key is, a lot of times, if we're using this classical form, is to say, well, when I'm halfway through the play, where am I? Because if things are really bad halfway through the play, that's probably really good. If things are really good halfway through the play, that's probably really, really bad. Okay? So if we apply this to Streetcar Named Desire, Streetcar Named Desire has 11 scenes. So it's not in 5 acts, it has 11 scenes, which means that smack dab in the middle of A Streetcar Named Desire is scene 6. And it's scene 6 where Blanche finally tells Mitch what's happened to her in the past, and Blanche and Mitch finally seem to be getting together. It's like Blanche, for all of her problems, has finally reached some sort of happiness with this guy. And Mitch too, right? So where are we? It's too early, right? So this would be a comedy if it was only a 6-scene play. We'd be a comedy. That would be it. They'd get together and it would be over. But man, we got 5 more scenes. And because of that, we know we're a tragedy. Just like Romeo and Juliet seems like a comedy, right? Things are spiraling out of control, but they managed to get married. If it ended in the 3rd act, because at the very end of the 2nd act, they get married, and in the 3rd act, they meet up in Juliet's room, right? They consummate the marriage. All of that happens in the 3rd, but in the 3rd act, also, Romeo kills Tybalt, and things start going downhill, and then we know that happened too early. They got married too early in the play, and that plunked them into a tragedy, because they have 2 acts left, and things are going to go badly, and they're going to end up dead, right? So that's what we're watching for when we read A Streetcar Named Desire. Look for this format, because definitely Williams definitely uses the classical structure, and by where we end up in scene 6, we should be clued in that we are in a tragedy. Things aren't going to end well. All right, guys, thank you.